Hey, welcome into the Big Ten Huddle presented and brought to you by FanDuel. I'm JR. That is Mike Broadbent here to talk about the Rutgers transfer portal recap. Got a lot of interesting stuff going on with Rutgers right now. Just did a video about their investment and stuff like that yesterday. If you're a Rutgers fan, go check that out. I kind of stuck up for Rutgers a little bit, as I do feel like people are kind of piling on them when the news came out about their deficit. But I do think that there are some positive things going on for Rutgers in terms of the investment and stuff that they're going through. We'll see if it translated to the transfer portal. But before we do that, Mike, please do tell people where they can find your content at your site and everything else that you guys do such a great job with.
Well, JR, thanks for having me on once again. Love coming on the Big Ten Huddle and chopping it up with you. But you can find me at Mike Broadbent on X or Twitter, whatever you call it these days. You can find our content. We are the Rutgers On 3 site, the Night Report. Our podcast is the Night Report podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Rutgers Podcast. We try and get as much Rutgers news out as possible. And it's been a busy few months for everybody in the college football space with this condensed portal window. And I'm excited to kind of talk about where Rutgers is at in this window.
For sure. And I mean, I cannot tell people enough about the Night Report and all the great stuff they do over there. Richie O'Leary, Alec. I mean, they just have a great staff and they do a great job over there. So seriously, even if you're not going to listen to the podcast, go over their site and check it out and everything, because they do have a lot of good Rutgers content over there and they do a great job of covering the team. All right, enough glazing of the Night's Report there. Let's get into this transfer portal recap. So obviously we're doing a transfer portal recap of every single Big Ten team. The playlist is down below. Any Big Ten team you're curious about, the rankings and stuff like that, can kind of give you some insight. But at the end of the day, the rankings can't tell the whole story. And that's what we want to do, is bring on guys like Mike to come in and talk about the team and kind of tell the story of what's going on with their football team. So Mike, let's talk about the additions first. I liked some of these additions. I do like some of these additions that Rutgers has made here. Rutgers has been a program that Greg Schiano has done a good job of going out and finding talent, whether it's been recruiting or the transfer portal. And so there are some good additions here. What are some of the additions overall on this transfer portal that have you excited and ready for next season to see these guys play?
So I'll start off with the offensive side of the ball. It was a bit of a surprise that they went out and landed an experienced quarterback in Dylan Lonergan, who started last year for the majority of the season for Boston College. Had a really hot start to the season. His first 2 games of the year, he had 8 touchdowns and no interceptions. I think he got banged up a bit, and he finished the season with 12 touchdowns, 5 interceptions for Boston College, and it was, kind of a disastrous season up there in Boston. But he I think he was Saban's last quarterback recruit, because he originally started off at Alabama. He transferred to Boston College, became the starter. But it's a bit of a surprise because I think the kind of ordained starter was expected to be AJ Surace, who is going to be entering his 3rd year in the program as redshirt sophomore. The first time Rutgers has had a quarterback who is able to sit for the first 2 years under the same offensive coordinator in my fanhood that I can remember. Usually they either play guys too early or the coordinators swap out and kind of they change their flavor and the guys end up transferring. And he was a very highly rated recruit coming out. You think he was a high 3-star, but he went to prestigious high school. His dad, Bob Surace, is the head coach at Princeton. So he's been a football lifer. So he's had himself built up over the years. Like he's got really great, mechanics, habits. Like he played a bit in the Norfolk State game, really impressed us with some of the throws he made. And he was expected to kind of be the starter next year. But the problem is, you look around the country, you look what happened to Wisconsin this past year, you look what happened to Syracuse this past year. You can't really go into a season with just one quarterback you think might be able to play. And the guys behind AJ Surace were a guy named Shane Ashenfelter, who completed like less than 50% of his passes as a high school senior, was a baseball prospect. He was going to get drafted in the MLB draft if he didn't commit fully to the Scarlet Knights football wise. And then you have a true freshman in Xavier Stearns. So they don't really have any true depth. So they had to, in hindsight, it makes sense why they went out and got somebody. They needed somebody they could rely on if, God forbid, anything happened to Surace. And it will be an open competition in the spring. So that's probably the thing I'm looking forward to most, is kind of seeing how that quarterback battle goes. Because I don't think either guy has the mentality of like, I'm going to mope if I don't win. I think they're both kind of in it for the right reasons. And from what I'm hearing, Lonergan, didn't come with a massive price tag either. So that was a good value add that they made. John McNulty, who's now an offensive analyst for the Scarlet Knights, was on the staff, I believe, in 2022 at Alabama when Dylan Lonergan was there. So there is a connection. Going further down, though, Rutgers overall in their portal haul so far has 13 guys committed. Only 2 of them are from the Power Four, and we'll kind of get into more of who those guys are. But sticking along the offensive line, they added 2 offensive linemen, Isaiah Cook, who is from Delaware State, a 4-year starter for Delaware State. He's played all over the line. He started at center, right guard, right tackle. I think he started in 4 of the 5 offensive line positions, and he's had a pretty good PFF grade. So he's useful depth. Even if he doesn't end up being a starter, he's a guy that you can feel comfortable plugging and playing in a lot of different places. Everett Small is the guy I think has the highest upside of the offensive line haul. He was a redshirt freshman from Eastern Michigan this past season, had a pretty good PFF grade in the 70s. He started, I think, 11 games at right tackle for the Eagles as a redshirt freshman. So he's got upside. He's a guy that they actually think could potentially win the starting job at right tackle this year. Whether it happens or not, that's to be seen. Sticking along the offensive side of the ball, Cam Anthony is a tight end they added from Ball State, who had some flashes this year. I think he only had like 10 receptions as a redshirt freshman. Definitely more of a raw, pass catching first tight end. But unfortunately, he tore his Achilles in training, so it doesn't seem like he's going to be a factor in the 2026 season. So they're still looking for a starting tight end. They landed a running back out of Louisiana Tech, Clay Tevnin. He's got 2 years of eligibility. He's more of like if Antoine Raymond's kind of like the Thunder, he would be like the Lightning, I guess. We expected this with CJ Campbell last year as a guy who could, he has more of a quick burst and he's able to, catch balls out of the passing game. That's Clay Tevnin. But, we were expecting to get, we had Josh Dye on campus, the Southern Utah running back who led the FCS in touchdowns and rushing last year. But it sounded like he has a twin brother who was kind of a package deal situation. And his brother has barely played even at the FCS level. So that was kind of a non-starter. But that's kind of where things are on the offensive side of the ball. They're still looking for a starting caliber tight end. They're still potentially looking for a starting caliber wide receiver, because we'll talk about why with some of the losses they've had. And they're still potentially looking for another offensive lineman on the offensive side of the ball. So offensively, I like some of the additions. They didn't really need a ton on offense. So I think if I was to give this haul a grade offensively, I would give it like a B- or a B. Like a lot of guys who I think could step in and be useful, but they didn't really have a ton of needs on offense either. So the quarterback commitment is probably the thing I'm the highest on, because it adds functional depth in a time where it's really hard to add functional depth at the quarterback position.
Yeah, and he's got experience too, which in college football right now, as we've seen in the playoffs and everywhere else, that having a first-year starter at quarterback can be really troublesome at times. And teams still do it. You saw Drake Lindsay this season. Julian Zane just went to the Heisman Trophy finale there, so it's not like it's a bad thing, but it can be something that is more difficult to kind of work through there. So I'm glad you brought that up. I thought that was a really interesting point there with Rutgers bringing in the quarterback after there was a lot of talk of AJ Surace going to be the guy, and so it's going to be really interesting to see how that competition works out this season. On the defensive side, Mike, this is really where I saw kind of 2 of the guys that I was the most high on: Malachi Davis, the edge coming in from Toledo, and Rondo Porter. I actually really like. I watched some of his film and what he's able to do. We'll see how that translates to Big Ten football. Obviously, I believe he played a year or 2 at South Carolina, kind of went down a level, has done well, was at App State this past year, going to be coming into Rutgers. We'll see how this goes for him. But what's your thoughts on the additions to the defensive side of the ball? Because Rutgers did not have a great defense last year, and they really need to try and supplement some of the players with, just some better players. I don't know how else to put it. I'm not trying to be rude to anybody, but just some better players.
Listen, anything you say probably isn't strongly worded enough. I know I've talked about it a lot, and maybe if you're not as well versed in Rutgers, I'll give you kind of a high level of how bad the defense was last year. Rutgers allowed the most yards per play of any Big Ten team in conference play in recorded history since 2000. So Sports Reference has data for yards per play going back to the year 2000. There was not a single team in Big Ten history in that time period who allowed more yards per play in conference play. So Rutgers was an abomination. Any word that you can think of that is a synonym for bad, Rutgers was on defense last year. There's just no sugarcoating it. They were awful. So anything is going to be better than last year. They made a bad hire with their defensive coordinator, which we could talk about where that situation's at now. And it kind of snowballed from there. So I agree. The two guys that I'm highest on that they've landed in the portal so far are certainly Malachi Davis and Rondo Porter. So Malachi Davis comes over from Toledo. He's Rutgers' highest rated portal ad according to the On3 ranking. He's ranked 283rd. He's kind of got the prototypical size and frame for a defensive end. I think he's like 6'4", 270. He's a guy that I think could be so Rutgers hasn't had a guy who's had more than 5 sacks since 2016 either. I think he's got potential to end that streak, but again, it all kind of depends on who he had as the defensive coordinator. I think he, at the very least, will be a capable, average Big Ten level starter. Rondo Porter is probably the guy that I think has the highest upside. He's a little bit undersized at 6 feet tall. He's also on his 5th school in 5 years, which is weird. He started off at, I think, Newberry College, and then he transferred somewhere and redshirted. Then he went to South Carolina, was like Scout Team Player of the Year, but Scout Team Player of the Year is like a redshirt junior. It's kind of weird. And then this past season at App State, he had his first and only really productive season in the FBS when he had double-digit TFLs and close to double-digit sacks as an interior defensive lineman. So those are the two guys I'm highest on. Their most recent commit is Kevin Humes, who was a cornerback from Maryland last year. He was committed to Boston College to the point where they even like tweeted out a signed graphic from the Boston College football account, but I guess he didn't actually sign. I think he was just committed, or rather, I think he may have signed an LOI, but he didn't actually sign his NIL rev share agreement, which is, I don't know what physically binds anybody to a school anymore.
Right now, you can sign anything in the ACC, and it sounds like you can still get out of it. So
it's unbelievable, man. So they got him. He was a corner who, I think he was a top 200 recruit out of high school. He went to St. Francis Academy, big time program there. He hasn't really put it together, but he does have the size, speed, length requisite attributes that they're looking for at corner, and that's going to be a through line for these defensive ads, because at cornerback they also added Zamir Dawood, who is a cornerback from Villanova, who's I believe like 6'1", 290, or not 290, 6'1", like 190. He was a track kid in high school. He's from the area. He's from North Brunswick High School, which is just literally 5 miles away from campus. And they added Bradley Jones, a cornerback from the Citadel, who is primarily a track guy. He ran a 10.31 for the Citadel track team, which, they have that, track converter converting 100-yard dash to a 40-yard dash. Apparently a 10.31 electronically timed is equivalent to like a 4.3 flat. So whether or not he runs that or not, that's the kind of speed that we're talking about. They added at the cornerback room, which was something they didn't really have a ton of last year. We were getting burned way too often in terms of the cornerback. So they had a goal of adding speed, and they certainly did that at the cornerback position. But they are guys, like I said, who two of those 3 guys in Kevin Humes, who was a 2-year contributor at Maryland, and Bradley Jones, who started for 3 years at Citadel, neither of those guys have an interception in their college career. So that's just showing a lack of ball skills. Like it's one thing to be able to like keep up with a guy, but if you can't actually make a play on the ball, like what's the point? Continuing down the defense, they added a linebacker in Ty Morris from Rice, who I think they had guys I would rather have landed at linebacker. He wasn't a guy that I was super impressed with film-wise, but he's going to add some experience depth at linebacker. They added Jaden Burnett, who's a very interesting player, very productive guy at both Louisiana Tech and at Tulsa the past few years. He's got 1 year of eligibility. He's undersized at 6 feet tall for a defensive end, but you watch his film, he is productive getting into the backfield. He's able to wrap guys up well. He has a quick burst. So I always question when you take a lot of outlier guys, like 1, maybe it'll work, 2, less likely, 3, 4, 5. Like it seems like you've kind of stacked the deck with risky ads this offseason. on the defense, and I hope it works, but I'm leaning towards it won't. And I believe that covers everybody they've added. Oh, one more guy, Jaden Lee is a 6'3", 300-pound defensive tackle from Maine, who has that size and length that you want, but he wasn't even the best defensive tackle on Maine this past season. So I'm very concerned with the defense once again this year, in part with the additions and in part because they don't have a defensive staff right now. It's almost 2 months since they fired last year's defensive coordinator, Rob Smith, and a lot of the defensive staff left because Schiano told them, like, hey, I want to keep you around, but I'm also still going to give autonomy to the incoming DC to determine who he wants to keep around. So that was kind of like all right, you should probably go find another job type statement. So yeah, we can go into the DC situation if you want, but if you want to keep it to portal stuff, that's fine too.
Let's maybe do the short version of it, because you and I were talking before on here, and there's a big long story with it and everything. And I think the story is awesome. And maybe at some point we do need to just do a podcast on that story, but at least kind of give us just the summary right now. Where did things kind of start at? What's a couple names that have been mentioned that you feel comfortable saying, and then where do you think it kind of is heading right now?
All right. So the long and short of it is, Schiano went big game hunting last offseason, swung and missed a lot, had to settle for a guy because he likes to work with guys he previously worked with. So Rob Smith was like the last girl at the bar. He took her home, and it was a total disaster. So this offseason, he knew he made a big mistake. Like, I've heard from reliable sources that he knew this was not a situation he wanted to repeat this season, and he had a better plan, and he was, had names that he wanted to go land. But it seems like the same playbook is playing out, where he's, nobody takes 2 months to hire a coordinator. I've done like absolute psycho research on this, where I've actually like taken every single coordinator hire from the last 2 years, and like the average time to hire a coordinator is like 2 weeks. And this year it's even less. It's like almost like a week for the Power Four to hire a coordinator. And we're now on day 54 of the defensive coordinator hire, waiting list. So we think he did the same thing.
That's like Penn State level of hiring a head coach.
Yes. Yeah. It's very similar, where it's just kind of like, it's become like that's the like first question you had for me. It's like, what's going on here? It's like, it's a curiosity because it's taken so long. And even like schools like USC, they had to wait a few weeks, and their fan base was absolutely like foaming at the mouth, wondering why they hadn't hired somebody. So we're, 54 days out. The long and short of it is, I think Schiano might have had a wider net cast this offseason, but the same results of no fish reeled in. I think he has a reputation of being hard to work for. There's not really a whole lot to sell. Like, Rutgers had a bad season defensively last year, and like, sure, like if you show improvement, that's going to be a feather in your cap as a DC. Like, Rutgers was like in the 130s in basically every meaningful metric in defensive rankings last year. And if you could even bring that to like the 80s, that's seen as a massive improvement. But it's a big risk in your career. Like, if you're an up and coming coach, do you want to like bank on doing that? And also it's one of those things, like, I'm an Eagles fan, and I think there's like a perception where like, if one guy turns the job down and you are thinking about taking it and you don't really see the reason why, like they might have had their own reasons for not taking a job, it might give you pause and just say like, I'll pass on this one. And I think that might be happening, where like maybe a lot of guys are just seeing the job go unfilled and have like a question like, oh, is there like a skeleton in the closet I'm not seeing? Is there something here that doesn't make a ton of sense? Because we've heard they have the money to pay top dollar for a top coordinator. So we don't really fully know why it's taken this long. We expected it to be a more well-run process, and it hasn't been. From all accounts, they're still confident they're going to get a guy that, they're coveting. Who that guy is, we don't know. The information has been very tough to get. It's like getting information out of the Kremlin to get information, as Brian Fonseca of NJ.com said. So I don't know. It's very frustrating, and it's something that like Rutgers fans continue to have higher expectations and expect more and get the same results. And it's very defeating, if I'm being totally honest. Like, we expected there to be a defensive coordinator hired in the first few weeks, and we're now 2 months out.
Well, let me ask you this. I didn't write this down as a question, so if you don't feel comfortable answering, obviously let us know. But I said on the show the other day that Greg Schiano, one of the best coaches in Rutgers football history, if not the best. Love Greg Schiano. I think he's done a great job, and I think that his name will always be remembered there at Rutgers. But with the way this is going and kind of the talk of maybe some of the perception of very difficult to work for, Greg Schiano, maybe he was better under the old times of college football, but now with this new era happening and everything else, and I've seen a lot of fans the past couple years be frustrated because you did have a more favorable schedule 2 years ago, but obviously injuries made that more difficult. You go 5-7 this year, which I think was actually kind of a pretty good achievement considering the defense and considering the schedule. But at the same time, if you have a defense, maybe you don't go 5-7, maybe you go 6-6, maybe you go 7-5 or something like that. Is there a possibility? I know Greg Schiano is getting paid a lot, so the buyout would be a lot, but is there a possibility that this season is kind of make or break for Greg Schiano a little bit, that people are maybe getting a little tired of it and saying, look, we've seen the success of Kirk Cinetti going to Indiana. We've seen this, the perceived success if things go well for Bob Chesney this year at UCLA. We've seen the success of bringing in a group of 5 guy who can bring some players with them and kind of revamp the program. If you invest, the guy will make it happen. Is that a thought process at all, or am I just kind of making up stuff here?
I think the main issue is that like a lot of the top donors are big Schiano supporters. So it's unless there's some like hidden like crypto billionaire that's a 25-year-old who's graduated from Rutgers who suddenly wants to be like the Phil Knight of Rutgers. I just don't see it happening. Like if somebody gave a blank check and said like, hey, I think this program has stalled out. I want to go out and get the best of the best. Like money is not an object. I think a conversation would happen if there was like a 3-9 season. But I think with the comments that have come out from the president and from the AD, who are both in their first year of their tenure, basically saying that like they think Greg Schiano is the best like pound for pound coach in college football based on like the results he's getting from the resources he was allocated. I don't think it's likely. I think it would take like a pretty serious scandal in order for Schiano to be moved off of this year. I do think that pressure is increasing because he had to do all the fundraising for NIL on his own because the athletic director who previously was here is a former lawyer. He wasn't like an athletics guy. He was an appointee from the governor, and he thought like this was all gonna be something that was wiped away by the courts and is actually illegal, and he didn't want any involvement with NIL whatsoever. And so Greg had to go do that fundraising by himself, and he was very frustrated with that. And the new AD came in from LSU, and the new president came in from LSU, and kind of knew what a well-run athletic program in 2026 looked like. So they took over the fundraising, and by all accounts, like the number that they gave him, they have gotten and surpassed. So he has the money he asked for in NIL. And so I think there is less and less excuses, which is kind of another reason why this defensive coordinator thing's weird. And if he does end up becoming the DC, it's kind of like, okay, then you even have one less excuse. So if you're now calling plays and you don't have to raise money, like there's less, in the crosshairs to look for in terms of blame. It's like, well, you don't have a DC because you weren't able to find a guy who you wanted. So I think his rope is certainly getting shorter, but I don't think there's many realistic scenarios that could play out in 2026 that would put Greg Schiano on the hottest of hot seats. If he has a bad season, if he goes 4-8, the temperature will rise, but I don't think it'll rise to the point of him getting even like a better chance than like 25% fired this offseason. So I think he's safe at least for one more year. Basketball, we could talk about another time. I don't think is I think it's a different story, but I do think there's a lot of consternation amongst the fan base. Just kind of tired of seeing the same stuff from Greg Schiano. Like, I think if you were to ask me after the 2023 season, where the fan base is split on like keeping Schiano or Schiano has to go, I think it would be like 90-10 keep Schiano to go. But there was a poll recently on the Night Report. Somebody posted like, is Schiano the right guy for Rutgers football? And it was surprisingly dead even. It was like 50-50, maybe like 55-45. Like the fan base is fairly split, and the delta is growing in terms of like the people who have kind of seen enough from Schiano. So I do think the fan base is beginning to turn and needs to see change, because I think we see this graphic every year a few times where Rutgers hasn't beaten a ranked team since 2009. And it's just been one mishap after another. You talk about the Illinois game last year where he ices a kicker in a windstorm where he's about to line up from 57 yards, and then Pat Bryant catches a crosser for a touchdown as time expires. Like, there's a lot that Rutgers fans are kind of fed up with, and I could go on and on, but I think I've been long-winded enough with this answer.
Yeah, I mean, just being honest, I was on the board the other day looking at, kind of some of the thoughts there and everything, and I think I saw a comment, I forget who the person was, but they said, the donors are still, infatuated with Rutgers versus Louisville in 2006 or something like that, and that kind of voiced the frustration a little bit to me of the fan base. But you're right. I mean, there are a lot of people that really like Greg Schiano. I love Greg Schiano. I like Greg Schiano a lot. I think that he's done a fantastic job at Rutgers, but there is a certain point when you start seeing success of programs like Indiana and other ones that have kind of been down at the bottom of the Big Ten as well, and they start having more success, and you start saying, well, if they can do it, why can't we? Do we just not have the right coach there in charge? And so it is a very interesting conversation how that'll play out. So Mike, we appreciate you coming on here and talking through the transfer portal, the defensive coordinator, Greg Schiano, all that good stuff with us. Is there any final thoughts or anything you want to get to before we get out of here?
Yeah, if you don't mind, we didn't talk about the departures in the portal, and who they've lost.
Oh, we didn't.
I know I've kept you here for a while, and I understand you wanted to not hear any more of the ramblings about Rutgers, but
please go ahead.
They did lose some top guys in the portal, and this is kind of one of the main reasons there's a bit of pessimism, because the guys that they've lost have been bigger losses than the additions that they've made. So outside of like the people graduating, like a guy like Ethan Kaliak-Manis, who was the best quarterback in the last at least decade for the Scarlet Knights, Gus Zielinskis, who was a 3-year starter at center, and Brian Felter, who was a 4-year starter at left guard. Like, they've lost a lot of highly talented guys. They also lost a lot of talent in the portal. So Ian Strong, the biggest loss they've had in terms of the on-3 rankings in the portal, he's 51st overall. Bo Mascow, he ended up at Cal. Conversation to be had there. I think he might have overplayed his hand. I'm surprised he ended up at Cal, given the interest he had early. And
he had Ohio State, and I think Texas was after him too. There were some bigger schools that were after him.
Yeah, the pre-portal rumblings didn't really shake out as much as the actual entering the portal results for him. Bo Mascow was another top 100 overall on 3 transfer portal guy. He was 86th overall. He ended up at Texas. I think a lot of Rutgers fans were kind of happy to see him leave because he was very inconsistent, but he does have good speed. I think he's a big loss. He's better than any of the cornerbacks they've brought in my opinion. He's got 2 years of eligibility left. Taj White was like a swing tackle. He's started a bunch of games at guard and tackle. He was a late entrant. He ended up at Colorado. He's 210 overall on the on-3 rankings. All 3 of those guys are higher ranked than anybody we've landed so far. Then Jordan Walker, the former walk-on defensive end turned starter rotationally. He ended up at Georgia Tech. Jacoby Henderson, the cornerback, ended up at Virginia. Daryl Dengoe ended up at UCLA, the defensive tackle. CJ Campbell, the running back, ended up at Duke. They had, of their 15 outgoing transfers, 7 of them ended up at the Power 4 level. 7 of them ended up at the G5, and only 1 ended up at the FCS, whereas the guys we brought in, 2 came in from the Power 4, 7 came in from the Group of 5, and 4 came in from the FCS. So just like on a talent level, it seems like we've lost more than we've brought in. That's why these coaching hires are so critical to the success of the Scarlet Knights in 2026.
Yeah, when you look at on 3, the ranking they have for Rutgers in the Big Ten is 12th, so it's not a bad ranking or anything like that, considering some of the other teams that are around, just right below Penn State and right above Iowa there. But yeah, definitely when you look at some of that stuff, I would tend to agree with you. It looks like they lost more talent than they gained, but who knows? Sometimes these guys from lower levels come in and play much better. But I'm with you. I would not bank on that. That's one of those things where if you can get that from a guy or two, that's great, but I probably wouldn't do that as much with the whole thing. So we'll see how Rutgers does next season. Mike, really appreciate you coming on here, keeping me honest with the departures and everything else as well, because I got too into the defensive coordinator and the Greg Schiano talk. But yeah, so good stuff here. Anything else you want to get to before you get out of here?
No, man, just thanks for having me on once again. Hopefully we could talk again as the spring ball season starts and talk about how things are going, which I'm sure we will. Love coming on the show, and I appreciate you giving me a platform once again to talk some Rutgers football.
For sure. And we'll talk basketball at some point, I'm sure, as well. Rutgers going through it a little bit this basketball season. And so we'll see how that all plays out, and talking through that stuff. So like I said, go check out Mike with his content on X, Mike Broadbent, and then also the Night Report, their podcast, Rutgers podcast, everything else there with their Rutgers content. They do such a great job, and definitely support them there. So thanks for watching and listening, everybody. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.